Hey guys, Kyle here. So, just before the show starts, I wanted to mention our Patreon. You can pay us $1 a month as a thank you, as a tip. You can pay $2 a month to get access to one of our bonus content shows, episodes 2 days early, and a secret Discord chat where all of our Patreon donors get to go and hang out and talk with us directly. Then there's a $5 tier that you can donate to get access to a whole bunch more content. We have multiple bonus episodes on there. So please check it out. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We don't advertise, we don't make money. So check it out and throw some money if you think that would be cool. Thanks. Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Niall. And Kyle, this week, I'm sure there's a lot of you mentioned that I came in here with a bit of a different energy.
Yeah.
Before recording, because I did. I came into this. I went grocery shopping and then came home and cleaned the kitchen. And then had a really successful round of a new game that I'm playing. So I'm coming into this in a bit of a different, we record post-work so much that when we record on a weekend, when I had a day to not be trying to put out fires at work, it does give me a bit of a different vibe. And I'm looking forward to it.
That is honestly great. And I love that for you. And also maybe an indication of how we should try and schedule our recordings on the week.
We're working to get this stuff shifted. There's just life. Sometimes life gets in the way.
Life is endlessly. Look, I can't wait to talk about this because I don't have to talk about my real life while we're doing. I have been so endlessly stressed out by work and life that it's honestly nice when I find a topic that I can just
give yourself to fully.
Yeah, just head down, just really get into it. Because wow, shit is fucking stressful. And I have too much shit going on.
So what did you find this week to soothe your troubled soul?
Well, Niall, this week I got on a topic that I was aware of and I knew the basic story of because we did a little bit more than brush up against it. We flat out referred to it in another episode. Because back in episode 332, if you will remember, and you of course remember what episode that was off the top
I've
of
got
your
an
head,
encyclopedic knowledge of what each episode is by number and name.
If you had to guess 332, which one do you think that is? Just throw one out there. It'll be funny if you
I'm
get
gonna
it.
Guess.
And
what
fine
about I'm gonna guess it was one of your parapsychology history episodes.
That's a good guess, but it was not parapsychology.
Okay.
If you had gotten this, I would have been.
We would just shut off the recording and called it that. If that ever works, then one day if there's ever a 2-minute long episode in your feed, that's what happened.
Yeah, first sub 5-minute episode here.
Yeah.
Because Niall just shot the episode out of existence, basically.
Yeah.
No, back in episode 332, we discussed the story of the Gulf Breeze 6.
Okay.
Which the very brief rundown, I mean, I suggest listening to the episode, but this is about 6 military defectors who went to Florida to maybe try and fight the Antichrist or some shit. And I think that one of them even accuses a Gulf Breeze local named Ed Walters of being the actual Antichrist they were hunting for. And it had something to do with his UFO sightings in the area. It's a really strange story. And like a lot of these stories, I actually recently found just a whole lot more information about it than when I had covered it initially. I think eventually we'll have to revisit the subject to really flesh out some more detail because there was more there than I realized. But we're not actually talking about the Gulf Breeze 6 this week.
Okay.
This week, I want to actually talk about Ed Walters and the Gulf Breeze UFO sightings of the late 1980s.
Oh, okay, so we're talking about the actual UFO sightings instead of the... Okay,
yes.
cool.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm down.
And so, like, the Gulf Breeze 6 story definitely merits a retread with this new information that I learned. But I think that to contextualize just how strange things were in this area of Florida in the late 80s and 90s, it's good to talk about this particular story. And it is... you run into a lot of run-of-the-mill UFO stories the more that you research this stuff.
Yeah, electronics getting disrupted, missing time, big flashing light, something swooping down from ahead, missing time, and you might end up even somewhere that you weren't when you left. Like you get a lot of that stuff. There's a lot
of tropes, and there are tropes in this case. But I think what makes this one interesting, and it has been rattling around in my head. I watched a documentary on it. I watched interviews. I watched an episode of Oprah that involved this Ed Walters.
I think that's the first Oprah watch for this podcast.
Maybe it's funny because like those really early episodes of Oprah, she had. I actually. Funny thing is, I actually have a lot of exposure to Oprah because my mom loved watching Oprah when I was a kid. She probably still does, but I saw a lot more Oprah than I really ever needed to. And I feel like the early days of Oprah, it was maybe not as many like, I don't know, celebrity guests. I could be wrong.
Well, yeah, she wasn't Oprah yet. Like she wasn't the like biggest person in entertainment.
Yeah.
So the show probably had a bit more run of the mill type guests as opposed to constant A-list celebrities.
It's funny because like the episode of Oprah that I watched, and maybe I'm just misremembering how what her style was, but like, because I saw her a lot in the early 2000s when I was a kid. And like the episode honestly almost felt like we'll get to this. Probably not. Oh, I should say up front too, this is only part one.
Okay.
This is going to be a multi-part episode. Definitely 2 parts, maybe 3. We'll see. But the episode of Oprah that has Ed Walters on it is like, it almost feels like a Maury episode. Rest in peace, Maury, I think, right? Was Maury the one who died, or was it
I have absolutely no idea. I didn't realize.
Oh no, it was the other guy. It was the guy who had the crazy show with all the people like you are not the father.
Jerry Springer?
Jerry Springer's the one who died.
Okay.
Sorry. The episode maybe I don't know, is Maury dead? I don't actually know.
I never watched any of these shows, and I have no idea who's alive.
You know the vibe that I'm talking about with Maury. Well, this Oprah episode with Ed Walters has him like telling his story. And there are people coming up from the audience. Like it was honestly mind blowing because I had never seen this. This is like, I think 1990 Oprah. Mm-hmm. There's people in the audience who are just kind of like able to like get up and start contributing, and Oprah would walk over to them with a mic and let them talk.
Yeah, that's I always think of that as like the one that gets referenced a lot for me with that kind of style is the Arsenio Hall show.
Yeah.
Where like they're just people it's in all the like 80s movies where there's like a daytime talk show and someone's in the crowd like handing people the microphone to ask questions to somebody. It's that formatting that like I don't know why Cronenberg is coming to mind because I don't think he's the only one that does anything like that, but yeah.
Well,
anyway.
it was that, and it was like people in the crowd were pointing out some things to discredit Ed Walters, and they had a I don't remember. We'll get to the actual story of all this eventually, but they had like some sort of like I don't know, like a scientist on, or like he may have been with the military or something, and he was just like, completely shitting on Ed Walters. But then there were other people there who were also like saying, no, I saw a UFO, blah, blah, blah. It just was like, it was like a round table of people either like attacking Ed Walters' story or trying to, reaffirm it with their own UFO experiences. And it's surreal to see Oprah just like in the middle of that, just like handing mics to these people. I don't know why, but it was very fun to watch. I know why it was fun to watch, because it was crazy and exciting. But
yeah, that's how you get
UFO
on
nerds,
daytime talk shows.
Yeah, so I was having a good time with that. But yeah, that's a long way to say that this story, the sightings in Gulf Breeze, they began in 1987, and to this day, I think they are some of the most controversial reports in ufology. With Ed Walters specifically, it's partly, I think, because of the bizarre details that would come out.
Okay.
But it's also due to this like fallout, such as the Oprah scenario, when Ed Walters' story went public. But then there was also quite a few reports that came from the just general public that seemed to corroborate his sighting, of people around this area in Florida saying that they saw the same craft that Ed Walters saw. So
okay,
this is an interesting one. So strap in. So story begins with Ed Walters, who is a resident of Gulf Breeze, working as a building contractor, and he recounts his experiences in a book he wrote called The Gulf Breeze Sightings, published in 1990 and co-authored by his wife, Frances Walters. And in the book, it's like you get side by side, like each chapter is separated by an event that Ed Walters is recounting, and then the second half of the chapter is Frances's perspective of the event.
Interesting. So each chapter gives you just two different perspectives on the same event.
Yes.
And I'm guessing they don't always line up perfectly, and
yeah. Ed's got a lot of his own stuff going on that we'll get into, but it's like they do occasionally differ a little bit, and like the feeling about what's going down definitely differs, because they're experiencing two very different things at the end of the day. Like these experiences are highly focused on Ed himself, and we'll get more into that. But it's an interesting format, and I gotta say, kind of a nice little kind of a nice an unexpected aspect of this case to me, because how often we run into these cases where it's like some man sees a UFO and his wife, like I'm trying to think, it's like, Mr. John Smith saw this UFO and then also his wife was there.
Yeah, and John Smith's wife, the only way that she will ever be referred to in a lot of these reports, it was also saw it, but doesn't want to talk about it. And it's like, okay.
It's so funny. Like I can't remember which case it was. It may have been the Michigan swamp gas episode, but I just remember being like, I'm learning about this guy's case, but I cannot find even like the name of his wife anywhere. She just gets brought up, and I was like, I do not know this woman's name. I don't know anything about her. But Frances has her own perspective in this one. So, cool. So yeah, in his book, The Gulf Breeze Sightings, he's talking about his experiences, and it would be published after these experiences in 1990. And then in the book, well-known abductee, ufologist, and guy who made you, me, Garrett, and Jules have a laughing fit on an episode because we were intentionally mispronouncing his name, Bud Hopkins, gives an introduction to the book, and I can confirm his name is not Butt Hopkins. So
I'm still not 100% sure. I don't think I will ever be 100% sure, and I think it just means we have to keep going with it.
That is one of the stupidest but funniest times. I called him Butt Dickens or something like that.
I don't know. But sometimes you just have to pop yourself. You gotta entertain yourself, and by entertaining yourself, you entertain others.
Oh yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think Bud Hopkins was for a time actually in communication with Ed Walters, so it makes sense that he would have a part in the book. So The neighborhood that the Walters lived in is pretty normal by all accounts. It's November 11th, 1987, and Ed is working in his office, which he describes as having a nice view of the front lawn. There's like a pretty good window that he can see everything out front from his office, and everything is quiet when suddenly there's movement near the top of these pine trees that are out in his front yard, and it catches his eye. So here's what he says he saw in the book.
Okay.
The window faces west, overlooking our front yard and its large circular drive. My pickup truck was parked to the left. On the opposite side of the street sits a neighbor's brick house. A 30-foot short-needled pine claims the middle of our yard. Its fairly full branches occupy only the topmost 10 feet of the tree. Some minutes later, I did happen to look out. My eyes caught a slight movement of light between the pine's limbs. I sat up and leaned over my desk to get a better look. It was still behind the tree, but I could now see that the glow was unusual, quite different from any of the commonplace planes and helicopters that populate the sky with their comings and goings from the Naval Air Station right across the bay. I still couldn't see clearly enough through the pine boughs to satisfy my curiosity. I went to the front door and opened it. Whatever it was I had seen was still behind the tree, but I could tell now that this glowing bluish-gray craft was like none I had ever seen before. This was right out of a Spielberg movie that had somehow escaped from the film studio. It was impossible, but there it was, glowing and gliding along like a cloud. There was a quiet in the air. As I stared at the craft, the hairs on my arms bristled. This was no movie prop gone astray. My first thought was to call the police, but then I realized no one would believe me without proof. I rushed back into my office and grabbed the old Polaroid camera I used so frequently on my job sites. Quickly, I stepped back out onto the small porch area. I took my first photo as the craft came from behind the pine. The craft was still partially concealed by a branch. I moved the camera from my eye to get a better look. My mind told me there is some perfect logical explanation for it all. My eyes told me something I absolutely didn't want to believe. This was a UFO, something that just could not be. My brain was numb. I was out and out stupefied. This was a UFO. The camera in my hand almost slipped from my grip. All my attention focused on the craft, on the bright glow of the power source radiating energy unlike any earthly craft. But for a UFO to slowly descend over a peaceful residential neighborhood made no sense. Why was it so low to the ground? Someone was sure to see it. Surely, if its occupants were observing or photographing, their equipment could do that from a much higher altitude. Were they having some kind of mechanical trouble? Was this an experimental U.S. military craft? What I was looking at is probably not what you would expect if you had closed your eyes and imagined a UFO. It was unlike science fiction and Hollywood depictions of a flying saucer. The pictures I took are clear, but it's not like seeing it firsthand. In person, it was an awesome sight and an unforgettable experience. It seemed to be nearly as big as the houses below it and 3 times as high. It glided along without a whisper of sound. There was no hum, no wind, not a single disturbance to the air, trees, or houses as it passed over them. While rocking back and forth, it did not seem to spin, so I never saw all the sides, only what is in the photographs. I estimated it at 200 feet above the ground, 60 feet in diameter, and 35 feet from the top dome to the bottom of the power light.
But what's its yaw? How does that hang? You know?
Yeah, it's definitely. So here's the thing: there are a bunch of photos of this thing.
Okay.
I was like, should I send them to Niall? And I thought about it, and I'm just going to be upfront with you. I think the photos are kind of dog shit. There is,
anytime the recounting is this spectacular, I just kind of assume that the photos are going to be dog shit.
Yeah,
because you can't have this level of description and have the photos be anything close to it, or else it's far too believable. You know, like you got to have the photos look like dog shit.
Yeah, they're like, on face value, the photos are like a little weird. Like it's something in the sky, but you can't make out much detail. They're just very dark and like sometimes kind of blurry, but you can see that there's like some sort of disc of light, and it has like it almost looks like It almost looks like a Beyblade, to be honest, like a double-decker Beyblade, maybe.
Let it rip.
Yeah, and that's like it's like a top, basically. So that's why he's like kind of indicating like this isn't a flying saucer. This is something else.
This is God's Beyblade.
Yeah, God's letting it rip in the arena. Did you have Beyblades when you were a kid?
No, but I had at my grandfather's house growing up, he had a set of battle tops like from the 60s or 70s.
Yeah.
So I had battle tops like before Beyblade was a thing in America, and I played with them as a small child. So when Beyblades came out, I was like, oh, so it's just this thing.
Oh, they're just doing that shit again.
Yeah, and I was already kind of in my cartoon, I'm too old for cartoons mode.
Right.
Because I did that way too early as a kid, and it was, a pretentious little fuck. But so but all this to say, I skipped Beyblades, but have played with battle tops.
Okay. I feel like we've had this exact discussion on the podcast. Am I crazy?
Probably more than you would think is possible for a fucking conspiracy show.
Yeah.
But yeah, I believe that we've probably had this exact conversation about Fortnite.
I was into Beyblades as a kid, but for a very brief period of time. And I remember at one point, when I was older, maybe in high school, rummaging through a closet and finding the Beyblades and just being like, why was I into this?
I mean, I get it in principle. It's especially when you get into the customization thing, you're building something that looks cool and goes fast and hits into shit. It's a pretty easy sell. The only problem was I just was anti-anime and cartoons at the time, so I didn't get into it.
But you could also break your shit with which I guess just meant you had to buy more parts. So I guess that's just
it's danger.
Yeah, that's true.
You love the toy that might fly across the room and hit into the wall.
Fair enough. Well, Ed sees this big Beyblade, and he had described it like I said, but he kind of later, he remarks how later it became a little bit more obvious that it wasn't quite as big as he thought it was when he first saw it, because he was just too freaked out and didn't have anything good to compare it to at the time. And he says that there were other details that he noticed about the craft that you couldn't see in the photos, which again makes sense because the photos are just not very good. There were these large black squares that he said looked like windows, and in between those squares were smaller openings that he believes were portholes. And a few of these portholes seemed to be lit, and there were diamond shapes between some of those black squares. And then another detail that he says that you can't make out at all in any of the photos is that there's these two horizontal lines going around the body of the craft. So apparently, this craft made no noise as it suddenly shot over to him to hover overhead. And a theme that will be recurring for Ed is that the presence of this UFO seems to affect him mentally and physically.
In what way?
I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
He describes it as if his, quote, whole body was screaming. And then suddenly the UFO reaches out to him. So here's what he says. I screamed with my mouth frozen half open, but the sound was hollow, dead like a vacuum. I couldn't even move my eyes or eyelids. I thought that I was dying. I was trying to breathe. There was air, but my chest wouldn't expand. I had to pant to get enough air, each breath shallow. This was it. I was dying. My brain was being squeezed and felt like it was going to crack open. The right side of my forehead felt like it had a knife piercing through to the back of my eye socket. No air. I needed more air. Panicky, I tried to suck in air. The best I can tell, this all took less than 20 seconds. Then my feet lifted off the ground. I screamed. A voice groaned in my head. We will not harm you. I screamed again. The deep computer-like voice said, calm down. But it was in my head, not my ears. I screamed as well as I could, put me down. A few seconds passed as I slowly rose away from the pavement. A dream? Hell no. This thing was real. The feeling of helplessness was the worst. No control. Just a piercing smell, a little scent of ammonia mixed with heavy cinnamon that scorched, then stuck to the back of my throat. My heart was pumping so hard I could feel its throb as it thumped against my unmoving chest. I could feel the thumping vibration pass down my legs. The voice groaned, "Stop it." I screamed, "Screw you." All this happened fast. Now I was about 2 feet above the street. I panted for air, but the smell stung my lungs. My brain started to black out, so I screamed. The scream was black and dull, just outside my mouth. Almost the way you feel if you dive deep in the bottom of a swimming pool with the pressure holding everything, even your own voice, close to you. The voice came back, but now it seemed to be female. An easy hum filled my head. Suddenly, from within my head came the sharp vision of a dog. Then another and another. I was confused. What are these dogs? Rapid visions, one after another, on and on. It seemed that I could almost see words beneath the dog visions. Something was flashing dog pictures in my head just as if they were turning the pages of a book. The hum continued. I had the sensation I was 4 feet above the ground. Wham! I hit the pavement hard and fell forward onto my knees. The blue light was gone. The hum was still in my head, but it quickly decreased and was gone, like the hum of a speeding car that races by. I collapsed onto my chest in the middle of the road, filling my lungs with real air. My stomach turned and I choked, trying not to throw up. The sound of an airplane passed overhead. I rolled over onto my back. There was no sign of the UFO. I didn't see where it went, but it was nowhere in the sky. There was just a single airplane to the north, headed west towards the Naval Air Station. Perhaps that airplane had saved me from being picked up by the UFO. It stayed on course. It had just happened to be passing by at the right time. I wondered if the pilot had seen anything. My neighbors must be deaf. How could they not see and hear what had happened? I stood up and called out, "Hey, can anybody hear me?" Again, nothing. I called for my son, but he didn't answer. Later, I found out that despite the television's high volume, he had fallen asleep on the rec room sofa. He, like my neighbors, had neither heard nor seen a thing. I shot an anxious look at the sky, but saw nothing odd. Doubt flashed through my mind. Was I crazy? Was it a hallucination? No, damn it, I'd seen it. I'd photographed it. So,
interesting.
Yeah, here's another thing that I've really liked about learning about this story is he writes in a pretty fun way. And it's not a high bar to cross for people writing about UFO experiences and abduction and stuff. But it makes sense, I think, why, he writes in a way that's fun to read, I think.
Like anytime you find a conspiracy writer or UFO writer, like anyone in the world of weird who is actually fun to read, it's such a joy because so many of them are either incredibly boring and technical or incomprehensible at times.
Yes. Yeah.
And so when you find a good writer and the prose is good, it makes things so much easier.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people seem to like want to write in this way where it's like this is the objective fact of the experience, and it's just like Ed's like writing about how he felt, what like physical and mental sensations he was going through, and he adds like flourishes to those descriptions, and that makes it way more fun to read than just like the object hovered 300 feet above me. It shot a blue beam. The blue beam, it's much more interesting that way. So Ed reunites with his wife Frances because she had gone to the grocery store, and she comes back and she's like alarmed by Ed's state. He's very clearly shaken, and I guess that she also notices that there is this like almost acrid, semi-sweet smell that is hanging on to Ed. And something I thought was interesting about the description is it's not that the smell was in the air, the smell was on Ed.
And it stuck with him, that like ammonia and cinnamon, did you say?
Yeah, that's what he says, yeah.
The new fucking fragrance from Ralph Lauren.
Yeah. Oh my God. Could they get like what's the big candle company? Candle Co. Yankee Candles. Can Yankee Candles do like abduction beam or something for the ufologist who likes his house to smell interesting?
Here's the thing. now would be the time to do that.
That's
if
true.
you're ever going to do that, because you can hit, like, someone has to have fucking UFO candles out there.
Oh my
right
God,
now,
please.
You know?
I would, if what's her name can go goop mode with candles, then we can get UFO scented candles, I think.
Yeah, I think that works.
So
Going goop mode is such a horrible way. Like, if the business itself is pretty bad, but going goop mode is not good.
it's another subject that we somehow keep coming back to. Sorry, I say we. I feel like it's me bringing it up every time.
Yeah, that one I can put up to you. Not that I would never bring it up, but I think that is one that is clearly rattling around in your brain.
It is. It's been stuck there for a while now. So Ed and Francis hurry inside, and he tells her what went down. And Ed's one of his first thoughts is maybe trying to get the story out there somehow, like out to the public, because he has these photos to, I guess, back up the story. But Francis isn't so sure, and they talk about it a bit, and they're both kind of concerned about the perception the public will have about a guy who claims to have just been buzzed by a UFO, essentially. Makes sense. So Ed suggests or maybe sending the photos to the Gulf Breeze Sentinel, which is a local newspaper. And they sort of talk through the pros and cons of this, and eventually Francis kind of has him convinced to hold off. Now, I don't know what changes his mind, but at some point he does change his mind. He decides to send in the photos in the story. So on November 17th that year, Ed decides to write a letter to the Sentinel, but he does it under a pseudonym. He calls himself Mr. X, which is kind of badass,
Fantastic.
right? Like, I feel like a lot of this story, there's so much in this story that just makes Ed sound like a real badass. So
of his own choosing, sure,
Yeah.
of his own design. Call the look. I can only think of there's a comic called Mr. X that I look at sometimes on Comixology that is like very hyper, like contrast, black and white, noir-y looking thing, and it looks cool. But that's all that I have. I don't. Why Mr. X is like the go-to like fake name for someone trying to be mysterious. That is not a good name.
No, I mean, I think the simplicity of it is part of the idea here. But the thing is, when I hear Mr. X, I picture the big scary fucking guy from Resident Evil 2. That's what I picture. But
I always forget about that because I don't really play many Resident Evil games. I always forget that that's like the go-to Mr. X.
Yeah, he looks like an abnormally large man in black, like down to the like almost inhuman features of his face. Like he's kind of like that. So that's what I picture when I hear this immediately. So the big scary enemy from Resident Evil had a crazy UFO experience.
All right.
But so yeah, Ed writes this letter under this pseudonym, Mr. X, to try and maintain his anonymous status. There's like something about, like, I guess he's like a known guy in the community in this town, which makes sense because I think at the time, I'm trying to remember the number that I read, I think it's like 8,000 people in this town, maybe. At the time. I could be wrong. It's very small, is what I remember reading.
So he people would know him by name.
I think that's the idea.
If you put it out there.
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's the idea.
That makes sense.
I could be wrong about the size of Gulf Breeze, but I remember reading it was small. So, or at least at the time. So with the help of Francis, he writes up this letter and he hand delivers it to the newspaper's office. Now, notably, Ed and Francis decide to omit the parts in the story about the blue beam and a telepathic communication. Ed is, I guess, nervous enough at this point about just showing photos and claiming to have seen a UFO. So he's like, I'm not going to put the extra weird bits in there.
Yeah, we're gonna keep this tame so that it sounds a little more believable.
Yeah, the Walters were both nervous about the possible negative publicity of being labeled a nut job, plus the believability, like you said. So Ed ends up meeting with the Sentinel's editor, Dwayne Cook, who is curious about the photos, given that they're Polaroids. And in Ed's own words, he says that Dwayne's like, oh, these photos are Polaroids are difficult to tamper with, so they seem more legit to me. I don't know how true that is. We'll get into
it's that first level of true where it sounds good. Yeah. But in reality, like I don't know how different it is to make it. Yeah. Well, I don't know.
The thing that we'll get to later that I've heard about Polaroids and I've seen how it works is the double exposure trick, where you you don't I think it's like something about like you don't move the frame and you take another photo on top of it. And that is a thing that will come up in this story later. But that's like how a lot of ghost photos have happened and things like that is through that process. But so yeah, he's talking with Dwayne Cook, who's like, oh, Polaroid's nice. And they take the letter and the photos from Ed. But Dwayne wants to know, of course, who this mysterious Mr. X is. And Ed insists that he cannot reveal this person's identity. They want to stay anonymous. So eventually Ed and Dwayne reach a deal where Ed's name would be omitted from the printed story. And on November 19th, the Sentinel publishes the photos and the letter from Mr. X, which reads like this. To whom it may concern, on the night of November 11th, I took the pictures you now see before you. I was reluctant at first to show them to anyone but my family, but my wife convinced me to show them to Ed. This is Mr. X he's saying Mr. X showed these photos to Ed, by the way.
So he's in the story character itself. He's like giving himself a step removed.
Yeah, trying to take some distance from it. It goes on to say, Ed in turn said that the photos should be shown to the press. That is why he is presenting them to you. I had just sat down to my dinner when I saw the object from my window. I rushed to my bedroom to get my Polaroid. I rushed outside and started taking pictures. I got off 4 good pictures and then had to change film. I got one more good picture before it shot straight up and disappeared. There may be some reasonable explanation for what I saw, but I don't think so. The ship looked about the size of a small house. It was, however, quite some distance away and hard to tell. It hovered in the sky for several minutes and then left. It did not spin or rotate, but it did seem to bob up and down while weaving slightly. It glowed from the bottom as if that may be the power source. The markings, windows, on the upper and lower section were aligned and spaced equally. On the top, there appeared to be a dome or bump that was quite bright. There was nothing colorful about it. No flashing lights, no beams coming from it, none of that Star Wars stuff. It was just a dull gray-blue thing. I don't think that it was military, but you may want to check. It was quite big, and I don't think I was alone in seeing it. I wish to remain anonymous, but if these photos and stories spark any interest from your readership, I may identify myself. I am a prominent citizen of the community and need why can't I pronounce this word? Anonymity at this time. Anonymity. Yeah. I don't know what it is about that word. It has tripped me up every time it has come up in this podcast, and it comes up way more than you might expect.
I mean, yeah, we deal a lot with secrets. Yeah. You know, we're a top secret podcast. We get all the hot goss.
I have enough.
So you got to keep your
trouble pronouncing words, and then they have to fucking throw a word at me that has 2 Y's in it like that. It's too fucked up. So I need anonymity at this time. I know what I saw and would feel much better if I knew I was not alone. Let me reassure you that this is not a hoax. I saw what I saw, took pictures of it, and have given these pictures to you. I wish I could come forward, but cannot. For while I have nothing to gain, I have everything to lose. Thank you for your time and understanding. And then there's a single editorial comment under the photos that says this. These Polaroid photos were taken from the front yard of a Gulf Breeze residence Wednesday evening, November 11th. If anybody saw it or knows any information regarding this, please contact the Sentinel.
Look, I know, like, this may not be true, but how it feels to me is that by putting his name in the article, it makes it way easier to find out that it came from him. Like, in a small town like this, it's like, who gave these to Ed Whalen? Well, Ed Whalen, let's see, they know these 6 people. We know it wasn't one of them. So I wonder who gave it to him. Like, I don't understand the attempt at anonymity, but then putting Ed Whalen's name in the actual article.
First of all, Niall, it's Ed Walters.
Walters.
I don't know why you got Whalen on your mind. I don't know if you were on a sailing out in Alaska recently, but you got whaling on the mind. So no, Walters.
Walters, Jesus.
But yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Why even bring up the name? And it's interesting because I could have sworn that I read that he like said, I don't want my name associated. Like, I don't want to, but apparently his name's in there. So I don't know what I don't know what I'm on about. I must have misread something, but yeah, his name is in there. And here's my theory about why this went out the way it did. I think he's kind of testing the waters to see how people react to the story. I don't think that he. Okay, I don't want to jump too far to the end, but because this is one of the theories about why the motive behind this story sort of involves Walter's personality trait of being maybe a bit of a prankster.
Oh, but I really should just start assuming that if these cases are like pre-2000 or like maybe pre-1990, that pranks are involved, because that is becoming a real through line to all of our coverage.
There's been a lot of pranks this year, I'm realizing. And like, we don't know if that's what this is. And there's, again, like I say that, the prankster thing, there is a lot of conflicting information that will, it's seriously like, for every like story of people trying to like corroborate or disprove what Ed's stories here, there is a counter story.
Of course.
Which is fucking, it's I don't know. It's interesting. So I don't know. And I also like, I kind of got an idea of this guy's demeanor. It's again, also funny how he kind of like comes across as being like going really hard against this UFO and fighting back against it and stuff in these stories. But I watched a video that was uploaded like 6 years ago to YouTube by a British couple who I guess at one point managed to track down Ed Walters in, I think, the 90s and like interview him. And he's got like a pretty soft, mild demeanor. I couldn't picture this dude like being like, "Get out here, you UFO son of a bitch!" You know, like I couldn't really picture that out of him. But that's kind of how he paints himself in a lot of this. And I don't know, it's interesting. So I watched that, and it was. I'll probably bring up that video later because it's kind of interesting. Mostly because it kind of goes nowhere. He's like being asked by these people who I think are genuine, like maybe UFO believers who are from a different country. So they're asking him questions about other sightings and things. And they talk for like 20 minutes. And then eventually Ed Walters is just like, all right, so I'm going to go now. It's, I don't know. It's, and he just is like, all right, yeah, it's all right. See you later. It's, I don't know. I'll bring up that video later probably and tell you a little bit more because it's interesting. But anyways, November 20th, the day after the publishing of this article, Ed would have his second UFO experience. And the details only get stranger from here because this time he has what you might call a warning of the UFO's approach. So the way Ed tells it, he had never been interested in UFOs and was never a believer of the phenomenon, so he didn't bother preparing for a second visitation. And before the first experience, it was just like not a thing that registered with him until it was thrust in front of him. So he's getting home mid-afternoon when suddenly the right front of his brain begins to hum, and it's the same hum that he experienced when hit with the UFO's blue beam. So here's what he says happened. Frances and I went to my office at the front of the house, and I told her that the hum was the same as the one I'd heard in the blue beam. She didn't know I was still hearing it. She was pale and upset, and there was no way I could stand to see her cry anymore. She asked if I thought the UFO was back. I said maybe, but chances were that the hum was just kind of left over, and everything would be all right. We walked out onto the front porch and looked around. It was 4:30 p.m., daylight, clear sky. We looked over every inch of open space, across every edge of forest, and past each telephone pole. Nothing to be seen. No UFO. Frances must have thought I was losing my mind. Thank goodness for the pictures. At least I had them, and they could be seen on the front page at any newsstand. The tension eased, and we went back into the house. I still didn't tell her that what the hum was, even then roaring in my head, but not as loudly as it had been in the blue beam. It was more like the sound of a hand vibrator held against my head. I told her to finish getting ready and went back into my office. I sat in my office staring out the front window. Maybe that blue light had screwed my brain up. I tried to shake it off and do some work. My building schedule still had to be met. The hum stayed. Then I suddenly heard a blast of air, just as if I were standing next to a bus just releasing its air brakes. This part is hard to describe. I heard the UFO voice again. It started softly. I couldn't understand anything, not a single word. I have no idea of how to write any of it, not one syllable. My best guess is that it was an earthly foreign language, maybe an African dialect. I knew this telepathy would be unbelievable when I tried to describe it, but it happened. I didn't see a vision of the being doing the speaking or see anything surrounding a being, only a voice. There I was, sitting alone in my office with that voice grinding out sounds. I felt dizzy. My heart pounded as I sat there bent over staring at the floor. I held my hands to my ears, supporting my head, and tried not to freak out. I thought that people in insane asylums who heard voices could be like me, or I like them. The hum had stopped when the voice began, and the voice was better than the maddening hum, even though the words made no sense. It was the voice from the blue beam, deep and heavy, with an almost mechanical tone. I recognized it. How could this be? How could I hear that voice? Why did my brain hear the sound and not my ears? Later, I would have time to speculate as to why I could hear the UFO, but then I just sat there and shook, with cold sweat beading on my forehead. The voice would pause, then continue again, as if I were hearing only one side of a conversation. Then it dawned on me. They were near. Somewhere out there in the sky, the UFO must be there. I didn't call my wife again, just sat and listened. A little while later, Frances came into my office and told me it was time for her to leave for the stadium. They're going to like a basketball game or some shit. Or band practice. They have a son in high school. That's what that's about.
Gotcha.
She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine and that I'd see her at the game. For once, Frances planned just to get the food started, let someone else serve it, and watch the game with me. A few minutes later, I heard her drive off with Laura to pick up one of her girlfriends who was spending the night at our house. I hadn't told Frances about the voices. I wasn't sure I could explain what was going on inside my head, and I didn't want to frighten her. Now it was close to 5 o'clock with the sun all but gone. The house was empty, and I was thankful not to have my family see me like this. I listened to the one-sided conversation as I picked up my camera and slipped out the front door. I stood between the house and a bushy tree looking over the horizon, still nothing. The neighborhood was quiet. I was alone, but instinct told me something was there and after me. My breathing echoed in front of my face as branches from the tree pressed against my neck. Droplets of sweat ran down to my waist, wetting my neck and my back. My pussy and my crack. The evening air seemed to be thick around me. Everything was so quiet I wanted to scream. "I hear you, you bastard," I shouted. The voice stopped. "I know you're there," I said, this time quieter. A rush of air blasted into my head. Maybe it had been talking to an African who was being held in a room with an airtight door. If so, not anymore. Everything was still and silent. Then a small speck of light appeared very, very high in the sky. It was falling at an incredible speed. The voice sounded again. I flinched back against the brick wall with a jolt that made me bite my tongue and curse. Damn.
I keep expecting this to like come to a conclusion at some point. Like I've been leaning back because I try to let like the stories go through. But this is a long one.
It is a long one.
I keep expecting it to be over, and it just keeps keeps happening.
And they, like I said, they get weirder and weirder. Hey, and feel free to jump in. Like I am okay.
No, I know. I just like I try not to interrupt a bunch while you're telling stories, but this is a fucking
It's a doozy.
Like this is an essay. This isn't just a recounting.
The book
Holy
is like
shit.
I want to say 350 pages, and I think he wrote another book after this one.
All right.
So he has a lot to say about his experiences. So it goes on. Be calm. Step forward, came the forceful voice. I raised the camera again, following the downward path of the UFO. The UFO voice says, don't do that.
Thanks. Good advice. Like, look, aliens, quick little thing. Just causing noise in someone's brain all day and then finally saying be calm like hours later. A little too late to start with the kind of like starting at a low boil thing. You've already got this guy fucking on the ropes.
I think maybe the implication here is that contact with the UFO had established this link to it, and it wasn't intentionally beaming this stuff to him. It just was. Maybe. I don't know if that's what is intended here, but I think that's kind of what it sounded like to me. So yeah, it goes on. Another voice, definitely a female voice that sounded distorted. Please don't do that. Another voice in Spanish. Los fotos son prohibido. The female voice. You can't expose them. They won't hurt you. Just a few tests. That's all. And Ed responds, right, if I wanted to be examined, I'll let you know. I shot picture number 6 as the UFO suddenly stopped its fall and hung there frozen, just beyond the power pole at the front of my yard. Somehow I could hear them talking to me, just as if we were all on the telephone. All the voices were deep, garbled, and somewhat computer-like. Whether they were actually hearing me or just reading my mind, I didn't know. The UFO shot over to my right, almost like a hummingbird, and hovered there. It seemed to be spinning from right to left, but very slowly. Ever so slightly, it would tilt toward me and then away, which I noticed because the big power light at the bottom grew larger and smaller. This craft lit itself up and was bright. It was so bright, in fact, that I still can't believe someone else didn't see it hovering there. I took picture number 7. The UFO voice says, step forward. We will bring you aboard. No way. What gives you the right to suck people up into your ship against their will? Then the UFO voice says, we have the right. I remember thinking...
Well, but also they gave him it, like they said, step forward and you'll go into the ship. And if you don't step forward, what gives you the right is they're actually asking consent here. You know,
I also love the bizarre implication of him being like, what gives you the right to abduct people? And the UFO's just like, no, we have the right. It's all good.
Well, yeah, because of the treaty with fucking FDR, right? Where they get to,
we signed the papers.
To abduct, like, yeah.
We're allowed to do this. One of your presidents said so. I remember thinking that the being was talking to me as if I were an animal. Here, Rover, sit, Rover. What a good rover. Click. I took shot number 8 next to the tree. The female voice. You must do what they say. They haven't heard us, and we are going back home now. Remember the dog visions? Dog after dog? Well...
Yeah, I do remember that.
It was a weird detail, huh?
Yeah. Were they different dogs, or was it just like
he doesn't say?
Yeah.
But what he does say here is, well, now visions blasted into my brain of naked women.
So dogs didn't work. They're gonna try naked women.
Yeah, they're trying to calm him down, I guess, or make him horny. I don't really know what the plan is.
Distract him, maybe. I don't know. Like maybe this is their version of "We Come in Peace."
Yeah, and you're about to come in. I don't know.
In your shorts?
Scratch that one. Remove that one from the record.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. We'll edit that out. Go ahead, get it clean.
Okay. He goes on to say, these are not drawings of naked women, but actual naked women. Flash after flash, each lasting about 5 seconds. Big women.
So was it a pipe?
Yeah, the treachery of nude women images. Big women, little women, fat, black, white women from every race and every age. There were even pregnant women. If this was meant to encourage me to come aboard, it didn't work. I stayed right where I was. The UFO voice says, we will come for you. I snapped picture number 9. The craft moved forward and then shot straight up, disappearing into the dark so fast, I couldn't see it leave. So,
All right.
It fucking
So
blasts him with nude women. It's the nude women beam was activated on this encounter.
Is this like the alien version of someone on like a public bus trying to airdrop the entire bus images?
Yeah,
Like that's kind of how this feels.
I really don't know what to make of the dog images and the women images, like because like so like the women, it makes me think, well, maybe these are the UFOs abductee like subjects that they've like maybe for whatever reason it would like I don't know what to make of it, but
they're just really into that website, the like people who don't like these people don't exist.
Yeah.
Where it's all just like weird composites of people that aren't real.
Yeah, that
they're
could
really
be
into that website.
That could be the thing that they're really into. I think though that the dog, regardless of what the explanation is, the dog images coming in the same way into his mind really throws a wrench in trying to understand what the point of either of those things are. It's like, but as best I can tell, I mean, he does make the comment like, were they trying to like tempt me aboard with puppies and women?
Yeah,
and that's weird and confusing. But
yeah, that is a very like strange bar. Like they should at least tried like Turkish Delight or something. Come on, let's get them. Let's get them in there.
Oh shit! I have a big question, but here's another good one. What would tempt you onto a UFO? Like, what would they have to beam into your mind to get you onto a UFO?
I mean,
bare minimum.
I mean, if they have like a really good nacho bar, I think that would do a lot of it. Or like an extensive Criterion or Arrow films collection.
Like, come check out our cool movies. We're about to watch Society.
Yeah, we have the like 2008 The Fall with fucking what's his name Lee Pace in it. That is for some reason the cheapest you can get that DVD is $50 and it's not available digitally. So that I think would get me on there. Okay, I've been trying to find that fucking movie for a
good
while.
Media collection that they're willing to share with you. That would be a good enticing
out of print shit.
I think I'd probably be caught with very similar stuff, but I think well, first of all, I would love to smoke weed with aliens. One, I don't really partake anymore, but like that's a joke that everybody on the internet makes. So I could come back and be like, yeah, I did it. And you know what? It was all right. A couple of them did hog the kush. But it was mostly a puff pass situation. But I don't know. They could I don't know, like a chicken parmesan. If they had like a chicken parmesan, it would be like, but to be fair, if you put a fresh chicken parmesan under one of those boxes propped up with a stick, that would also probably catch me. So
yeah, that would take care of it.
It's like my favorite meal.
If you smell a chicken parm, you do lift up into the sky horizontally and follow the smell wafting. You know?
And I used to do that a lot when I was stealing those off of people's windowsills.
I don't know why in Columbus that was just like a thing. You baked all of your fresh, crispy chicken parm and you let it cool on a windowsill. It's a strange local custom.
Yeah, big Italian population in Columbus. On November 25th, Ed is excited to see that the Sentinel had printed a handful of stories of different locals who were coming forward to report witnessing the same UFO that the so-called Mr. X had seen. So we have Jeff Thompson, who was, again, a local. He calls in and reports this daylight sighting at 8:15 a.m. He sees a UFO near the Oriole Beach Elementary School. And he watches it. UFO shoots up and hovers for 30 seconds before just speeding away. And Thompson, I guess, said that just a few moments later, he saw two jets that appeared to be chasing after this object. So that's one of the accounts.
Okay.
And we have another one. At about 6 p.m., only an hour after Ed had taken the first 5 pictures, a woman named Linda Lube, I believe is how you say her name, she was outside barbecuing and saw a strange light moving southeast across the sky toward Gulf Breeze. And she says, I had a feeling it was from another place. I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see the form, but I could tell I've never seen anything like it. Then a week later, Mrs. Lube saw the UFO photograph in the Sentinel, and that seemed to confirm for her that it was the same craft that she had seen that day. Then there was a report from Diana Hansen, At 7:30 p.m., she has a sighting, and then another sighting at 9:30 p.m. of an object, quote, in an apparent landing mode, and it lit up the woods that were behind the house of an executive who wished to remain anonymous, apparently. On November 11th at about 2 a.m., 15 hours before Ed's first sighting, a Mrs. Joseph Zammit says she was awakened by her dog growling. She got up and held onto the dog and was led to the door. And as they approached the door, the dog began to bark, and she opened it. And she says that when she opened it, she looked up into the sky and saw the same craft that was later depicted in the Sentinel. Quote, and there was a stream of light which came down into our canal. And I guess this doesn't get mentioned in the paper, but maybe he talks to Mrs. Zammit later, because apparently there is this stream of light that she saw, and it was blue, and she like specifically was fearful that the blue light would take her dog from her. But as far as I know, the dog survives the story. So,
oh, good.
4 days later, somebody named Kathy and three friends saw an object hanging over Bayou Texar. And I guess what was notable about this particular sighting is the object's departure. So Ed's account, Mr. X's account, had not yet been published in the paper, but Kathy had said that after a few minutes, the object dipped toward the right and disappeared. So, like, I think the implication is that that particular movement is similar to how Ed would see it moving around.
Okay.
And so another notable thing is that all these reports that were coming in were ended up forwarded to the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. The editor, Dwayne, that guy from the Sentinel, he ends up sending them out to MUFON. So MUFON is getting these reports as well. Now, another account that came on the same day as Ed's sighting comes from Charles and Derry Somerby, who, interestingly enough, along with a couple other people in this case, were brought onto UFO Cover Up Live to tell their Gulf Breeze UFO experience. So,
hell yeah, crossover. Let's go.
Yeah, like when we covered that one a while ago now as well, but UFO Cover Up Live was a disastrous attempt at doing a UFO government cover-up, like, live documentary event thing on television, and it's all kinds of fucked up, and it's involving so many notable people from ufology and all the, like, Rick Doty, Bill Moore, so many people. I think John Lear, like, there's all kinds of people involved in that, and it is a beautiful disaster. But they have these Gulf Breeze UFO experiencers telling their stories on that program. So yeah, Charles and Derry Somerby say this. It was a few minutes after sunset on Veterans Day, and which is the day that Ed saw it. And wife Derry and I were just finishing up our evening walk along Hickory Shores Boulevard in the Midway area. We looked out over East Bay to admire the cloud formations when our attention was drawn to a round object moving in a southwest direction toward downtown Gulf Breeze. There were bright lights around the bottom, another at the top. None of the lights were colored or flashing. Our thought, it's not an airplane, not a helicopter, not a bird. What is it? Movement of the unidentified flying object was steady. No hesitation and no apparent change of course. Watched the local news on television that evening and looked through the morning paper to see if anyone had reported the apparition. When it appeared no one else had been looking up at the sky at that moment, we forgot about the incident until the pictures appeared in last week's Sentinel. Unfortunately, didn't have a loaded camera or binoculars with us at the time of sighting. So, as of this flood of reports on the 25th, Ed says he hadn't come into contact with any MUFON representatives yet. However, like I said, MUFON had caught wind of this like burgeoning saucer flap and were starting to take interest. And in his book, Ed also notes that it was odd that nobody in the military seemed to know what was going on with these sightings. And an important thing is this area of Florida, there are quite a few military bases, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, it look, those maps of military bases and UFO sightings continue to be very interesting to look at side by side for no real reason.
Yeah, very interesting. One of the bases located in Valparaiso, Eglin Air Force Base, I think this is one of the big ones, by the way, had at some point been contacted about the sightings, which I also discovered that because I was like, I know about this Air Force base with regards to UFOs for whatever reason. Turns out this is the Air Force base that this year U.S. Representative and insane person Matt Gaetz claims captured radar data and images of UFO that was, quote, not of human capability. So Matt Gaetz is looking into that one, I guess. And then FAA air traffic confirmed that Eglin tests tests weaponry, but would not say if any top secret craft were flying that evening. And then the Eglin Public Affairs Office had been reached out to, and they reported that nothing out of the ordinary had been captured on radar, and the entire evening had proceeded as usual. While the second sighting was strange enough, things continued to get stranger. On December 2nd, 1987, Ed had a third experience with the UFO. So this is I think where we're going to cap this episode, is this third experience.
All right.
So Ed had turned in for the evening and was awoken by something around 3 a.m. And here's what he says. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when something, not the dog, woke me. The clock's red numbers glowed in the dark. It was late, 3 o'clock in the morning, and very dark outside. As I rolled over, I noticed that the pool pump was running. We'd forgotten to cut it off again. I knew I should get up and turn it off, but I was in that half-sleep, half-awake zone and so relaxed. Then I heard a baby cry. Baby cry? Strange. We don't have a baby.
I don't know a lot about this man's personal life, but there had been no mention of a baby so far.
No baby. Our neighbors don't either, and if they did, how could I hear it from so far away? I listened closer, but without rising from bed. In a few minutes, I heard distinct voices. I shook myself awake and realized the voices were in my head. They were back, no mistaking that voice, like a computer-type machine sound, very deep and almost as if it were coming through a blown-out speaker. If you ever talked through a comb with a piece of paper over it when you were a kid, you know what I mean. The voice is like that, deep and distorted. Even though I couldn't really hear the words, my brain somehow understood the sounds. They were out there, I knew that. Were they waiting for me? I wasn't sure. I was afraid they intended to fulfill the parting promise to come for me. But why? The questions were shooting through my head. Why come for me? Why show up and then disappear so quickly? Why hover long enough for me to take some pictures? Why not land? Why not just get it over with and let everybody see? Just go ahead and land in the middle of the Orange Bowl with 70,000 football fans watching. That would do it. But that didn't seem to be the way they did things. I lay there, afraid to move. I just listened. I felt stiff and my neck muscles started to twitch. I slid my hand over to Frances and touched her on the side. She shifted in her sleep but didn't wake up. Again, I poked her with my fingers. This time she turned on her side to face me and laid her left arm across my chest. She started to snuggle a little closer and must have noticed something wasn't right. Quietly, she asked, "What's wrong?" I didn't say anything. The last time I had said something out loud, they had heard me. I lay there staring at the ceiling in the dark. Should I get up? The pistol was just to my right on the nightstand. I listened. They spoke in Spanish and were tending to the crying baby. I've translated as well as I can. Female voice. She wants some milk. Male voice. If they don't give us something other than bananas, I'll... Female voice. Hush, they'll hear you. Male voice. But why do they just eat bananas? I know this sounds bizarre, and I was tempted not to tell it, but bananas are what they were talking about. I lived in Central America for about 5 years and speak Spanish to a modest degree, although I can understand it even better. Male voice. Hijo de puta. I'm not sure about the spelling, but it translates to a slang version of son of a bitch. I mention this because I remember hearing it in parts of Nicaragua and Costa Rica. Maybe the voice is home. Male voice. Son of a bitch. Look at all those maybe 20... What is this action? What's happening? And this is a rough translation. Female voice. I saw them like that last night. The chief, her word was jefe, apparently referring to the one who talks to them, said they were taking on power fuel. The baby was still crying. By now, of course, I was wide awake. Sweat soaked my back and rolled down my underarms. I was afraid to move and afraid not to. I knew the UFO was there, but did they know I could hear them? So, knowing that the UFO is returning, Ed springs into action, grabbing a pistol and creeping his way to the front of the house. He looks around for a bit outside, but he doesn't spot anything. There was too much cloud cover, and he feared that the UFO could have been hiding. He then realizes he's not sure where his dog is, his dog named Crystal. So
no.
Ed summons up as much willpower as he can and pokes his face out the front door to call for the dog. So he looks out and he ends up like in the backyard onto the pool deck. And he sees Crystal just laying there sleeping. So she's fine.
Okay.
But he can still hear this hum. And suddenly the UFO comes down super fast above him. Just really, really fast. He describes it from the size of a dime to half the size of my pool in about 2 seconds. And he freaks out and he runs back inside and slams the door shut and locks it. It's about 100 feet above the pool, just hovering there for a few seconds. And then it starts to drift away from the house. So he's like contemplating, does he shoot at this thing? Because he has a pistol now.
Yeah, a lot of people tend to do that. It doesn't normally do a lot, but it is weird that he has a gun and isn't at least trying.
Yeah, and he sort of like makes this weird implication in there where he's like, well, if they were a civilized culture, they would have like, been polite about trying to get me on their craft instead of sucking me up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
maybe I
true.
can just shoot him.
But if you shoot them, then you definitely are aggroing them.
That's true.
And they might start attacking you. So like it is kind of a 50-50 shot there of whether or not, shooting at the I don't know what the best option is for shooting this thing, but the worst is that something with much better firepower comes back and just obliterates
Yeah. So suddenly he hears the UFO voice talk to him again, and it orders him, step forward now. And he mutters to himself, not in this life, and takes his Polaroid camera out. And he says here, I pointed the camera with my right hand and aimed the gun with my left. The craft moved a little further away from the house. Then they just hovered there out over the field waiting. I wasn't exactly sure for what. Knowing it was crazy, I slipped out the door and dashed to the first windscreen. I made my way to the far end of the pool from windscreen to windscreen. Hiding behind the fourth one, I leaned my left shoulder against the right wooden edge, peeked around it, and watched. The UFO changed color and almost disappeared into the darkness. The bottom power light turned from white to orange. The dome also turned orange, but the portholes that I could see were still white. I raised the camera and took photo number 10. Flash. The flash cube was in the camera. In the dark, I hadn't noticed. It lit up my position like a spotlight. I might as well have just stood up and yelled, here I am. Instead, I screamed, damn, damn, and started running for cover back to the kitchen door. When I reached the door, Frances was yelling in a whisper, what was that flash? I quickly explained it, then tried to convince her it hadn't been completely stupid for me to go outside. She continued to scold me as we watched the UFO through the window. Seconds later, as quickly as it had dropped from the sky, the UFO shot straight up. No sound, no wind, just a flash at the bottom turned white and it was gone. And then the hum in his head fades, and he remarks to Frances that he's kind of like, actually, I'm kind of happy I have the hum because then I know that this thing's coming. I have like an alert. And of course, notably, this time Frances had also seen the UFO. She too describes an object that moved at inhuman speeds and instilled fear and awe when you saw it. And so Ed and Frances attempt to return to bed, but at 3:30 that same night, about half an hour later, the UFO returns. And this time, however, notably, there is no hum in Ed's head. They only hear the dog Crystal bark once. And Ed says that's unusual. And he grabs the pistol and hurries to the window of a nearby outdoor balcony that faces the backyard and the pool. And this is the little story that we're going to end this episode on. I felt for the draw cord and pulled it down quickly, leaning forward as the blinds came up. On the other side of the glass was a small creature. Big black eyes stared into mine. Just inches separated us. I screamed and fell backward onto the floor as my feet got crossed. My head and shoulders hit the closet door. The creature just stood there staring in at me. It was maybe 4 feet tall. A dark, grayish-black box-like thing hid most of its body. The helmet over its head had a clear insert that revealed its eyes, really big eyes that covered the top half of its head. It grasped a glowing silver rod in its right hand. Lying on the floor, I was about 14 feet away from the door. The creature hadn't reacted to my scream or the way I recoiled from the door. It simply stood there for a few long seconds, calm and just looking in. Straight in, not turning its head or leaning closer to the glass. I stole a quick look at Frances. She was on her knees crawling across the bed toward me. At that moment, she was closer to the creature than I was. What if it came after her? I still had the pistol in my hand, so I quickly raised it and pointed it at the creature. I wasn't going to shoot unless it tried to get through the door. The creature stared at me with eyes that showed no fear, eyes that were calm, eyes that were almost sad, eyes that somehow seemed curious. It felt like time was standing still. Frances was looking at me, then at the creature. What was going to happen? Would I shoot? No. Would the creature try to come in? No. It simply turned to the left with a deliberate movement and walked out of my view. Anger swept through me. That little bastard had just scared me out of my mind, and now it was just going to walk away. The hell with that. I wanted him. I scrambled from the floor and got back to the door in a few steps. The deadbolt and passage lock were impossible to operate without putting the camera and gun on the floor first. I unlocked the door and without picking back up either of them, ran onto the porch. The creature was steadily moving across the deck and toward the stairs. I was about 20 feet behind, intent on capturing it. Moving as slowly as it was, I could catch it in no time. I'd throw a body block and drag the little critter back into the house. I pushed the screen door open.
This guy just like hockey checked an alien.
That's what he wants to do. That's his plan.
Okay.
I wish, on the scale of attempt to cower in fear from an alien to attack and kill a gray with your katana. This is somewhere in like the middle, I want to say. But here's what happens. I pushed the screen door open and took 2 steps onto the wooden deck. Bang. The blue beam angled down from the sky. My right leg from the knee down was hit, frozen, like it was nailed to the floor, being squeezed. I fell. My forward momentum made me pull and twist my knee as I fell. My right leg was stuck in place. Shit, I screamed. Frances ran onto the porch to help me, and I yelled at her to get back. The blue beam began to lift my leg and pull me out from under the roofed porch. I leaned back and grabbed the screen door jamb. As I leaned back, I was looking straight up into the bottom of the UFO. It was maybe 50 feet up with the beam just clearing the eave. The sight was enough to make me shudder, and I almost lost my grip on the door jamb. No wonder the creature was in no big hurry to get away. Its buddies were there, and maybe this was all a trick to get me outside. If it was, it had worked. So that is his story for that evening.
So the beam can just target a limb and make it just entirely freeze in place.
Yeah, if you touch the beam, that part of you gets frozen. This particular story ends with Ed describes Frances holding onto him and both of them trying to pull him away from the UFO's blue beam. And as they struggled, it eventually relinquishes his leg and it starts to leave. And Ed says that he could hear the alien creature or whatever this thing was walk through the back field of his backyard and out through the fence's chain link gate. And he manages to again rush to his Polaroid camera and come back to the back porch to snap an 11th photo of the craft. And that is where we're going to leave this story for now. Okay. There is so much more.
Which is wild because we've already had 3 pretty absurd alien encounters here.
Yeah.
I feel like if there's a part 3 of this story, I cannot wait to see what the fuck that looks like.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, this story, it's also it's crazy enough, right? But it kind of gets wrapped up into the Gulf Breeze 6 incident later on as well. So it wasn't satisfying enough to just be this insane story of multiple UFO encounters and an alien contact. Eventually, you have to bring in the military defectors trying to defeat the Antichrist, who is Ed Walters, maybe. So that's where we're stopping it for now. We will continue this in a part 2, and then maybe a part 3 if it goes that far, which it very well could. So Niall, that brings me to the big question. If you're ready,
hit me up. What do you got?
So we kind of were joking about this earlier. If you had a haunting UFO encounter and wanted to submit the story to a public news outlet using a fake name, what name would you use and why?
Man, there's a lot of different avenues you could go in here. Like going for a pun name gives a different vibe than trying to sound mysterious and cool.
I know what I would do. You want to hear mine?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's like it's some people name themselves really weird stuff when they're trying to like have a pseudonym to keep themselves anonymous on the internet. You got all kinds of usernames in real life. Sometimes you name yourself after a sex act. So that's how we got Deep Throat. I think it would be really cool to name myself after a Hanna-Barbera character.
Okay.
I would want them to refer to me as Snagglepuss.
Okay.
And my hope would be that, like, people are reading my story, and because I'm named Snagglepuss, they can't help but read it in his voice. Like, heavens to Murgatroyd.
Yeah.
That would be kind of
I think
fun for me.
I do think that would add a nice little a nice little kind of twist to your story.
That was Snagglepuss,
it might
right?
help sell a couple issues. Yeah, I
think so. I think so.
I don't remember all of the. I watched some Hanna-Barbera as a kid, but I don't remember the like second tier to third tier characters. I tend to get
it's like Snagglepuss or Tomcat. But here's the thing. Hanna-Barbera cartoons were one of those things where it's like there's nothing animated on except Hanna-Barbera when I'm watching, and it's like, okay, I guess I'll watch this shit. That's how I kind of treated it as a kid. So, but I really want them to have that voice in their heads when they're reading about like, oh, the UFO swooped down, or however, like that would be fun.
Yeah, that's what they say. Yeah. That's how this all goes. I honestly, I think that I'm going to try to put up. I'm going to put my stories out under the name George W, but the W is two V's.
Oh,
Bush,
okay.
Because I think that like he's not really using it right now. I think that name is kind of
he's
open.
He's not using it?
I mean, like he exists still, but I
barely.
don't like you don't. Yeah, like he's kind of off to
like
the side painting
and
probably still making way more money than I'll ever see in my life by doing nothing, because that's just what happens. But I think like it would be really funny to start like confusing people thinking that George W. Bush had UFO encounters, because then that also kind of gets him back for the whole invading Iraq thing a little bit, where I just like inconvenience him on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
So I think like I think honestly there's a bit of a victory there for us if we start to just make George W. Bush's life a little bit harder by sending out UFO encounters with a confusing
name. The only thing that I would say is you do run the risk of him being like, oh, I can cash in on this UFO business. And so what starts as maybe an annoyance or an inconvenience becomes another cash cow that George W. can, get into while he's, painting remorseful portraits of, people who died as a result of his decisions.
Okay, sorry, this is an entirely separate tangent, but he paints pictures of like dogs, right?
Oh, is that what he does?
I think like he does like a dog. He has like a dog series that people have bought. I was wondering if there is some way that maybe the dogs that were flashed into Walter's mind were paintings from George W. Bush, just to kind of wrap it all together.
Maybe. No, I just assume George Bush in between painting is just like counting all the money that he got from oil death, saying like, I'm rich, bitch.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think he and what's his butt, fucking Dick Cheney still talk?
Oh yeah. I think they do more than talk. I think they paint together.
They trade.
Dick Cheney's Dick Cheney's a little bit more less out in the open with the painting habit, or hobby, I guess would be a better word than habit.
Yeah.
And Bush is, he's Bush always struck me as a kind of president I'd like to sit down and have a beer with. And that's the kind of attitude that he takes to painting, I think.
I think that he's more likely to do the wine painting classes than have a beer. So if you want to split like
he's just a good old boy,
glass
though.
from a box of Franzia and work on your paintings together.
Can you imagine slapping some boxed wine with Bush and Cheney? And then painting.
Fucking. Do you think George W. Bush has ever slapped the bag?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I feel like he had
absolutely. You think?
He was a partier in college, right?
Oh my god!
Wasn't the whole thing like that he did coke in college?
He's like fucking around at the Skull and Bones Society, just fucking off his ass on Yellowtail or whatever, that kangaroo wine or whatever. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I think he was the one in Skull. I think both him and his dad were in Skull and Bones, and if it was just one of them, well, that's my bad.
No, I think they both were.
Cool.
So
well, we got down to the bottom.
I'm George W. Bush.
Nice.
And you're Snagglepuss. Yeah. Be on the lookout for us in UFO Weekly.
Definitely. Cool. Well, Niall, it's been fun.
Yeah.
We're gonna continue the Gulf Breeze UFO sightings in part 2. You ready to move on to some business?
Yeah. So if you want to find us on social media, we're all over the place. We're on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
And we're on all your favorite podcatchers, from Google Play to Spotify to Apple Podcast. If you look up It Gets Weird, you'll probably find us on most major podcatchers.
Follow us on twitch.tv/ItGetsWeird, where we're streaming video games sometimes. Check it out. Email us, itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. What would your anonymous UFO story name be? We established ours. We want to hear yours. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We have a $2 tier and we have a $5 tier. At the $2 tier, you're getting a bonus show called It Gets Weird TV that comes out every other week, where Niall and I watch some weird television shit and discuss it. Right now, we're wrapping up season 1 of The X-Files, which has been fucking great. And then you get to vote as a donor on our Patreon on the show that we're going to do next. So if you want to have an influence on that decision, plus listen to a great series, check out the $2 tier. At the $5 tier, you get access to It Gets Weird TV plus another bonus show that comes out in the off weeks of It Gets Weird TV. So you're getting bonus content every single week. Whether you donate to the $2 tier or the $5 tier, you get access to the main show 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday. And you get access to the Discord, where we're hanging out, chatting about Bigfoot's sexy bod with all of our listeners. You can talk to us directly on there. If you don't get an invite to the Discord through Patreon, shoot us a message through Patreon. We'll hook you up. Just let us know. There's technical difficulties going on that's been happening for a long time. So hit us up. We also have a $1 tier where you don't get anything out of it. You're just saying, hey, I like your show. Thanks for doing what you do. Here's a buck. Here's a tip. If you can't donate, please tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your congressman all about It Gets Weird Podcast.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for continuing to support the show. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Niall.
And I'm Kyle, and I'll see you in part 2 in Gulf Breeze UFOs.
Peace.